Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, aneighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Today we have another Things Hidden discussion set for you today, and that means we're going to talk about current events from an anthropological grounded perspective. And joining me today to do so is our friend Shane Kennedy. How you doing, sir?
Doing great. What about you, David?
Doing great. So let's hit the ground running. I wanted to open up by exploring. I saw a little Twitter exchange that I thought, reflects some of the problems with trying to repeal personhood in the pursuit of some kind of new universalist morality that globalists try to create. And it is involving someone was sharing a collection of tweets from Ukrainians or Ukrainian sympathizers talking about the recent death of civilians who were destroyed on the bridge to Crimea. These are Russian citizens. They're civilians. They're not part of war. And this person said, these people are unwell. And he screenshot some of these Ukrainian sympathizer comments saying, how old is the daughter? I haven't seen details. I heard 14, no tears for her. She'll be better off without a horrible, hateful person for a mother because her mother was killed in the bridge attack. Another one says, yeah, I don't give a damn about the kid either. Another one says, how do I get a still photo of the girl hanging out through the window? I think it would make a great meme or a t-shirt. And that's in reference to Natalia Kulik, the woman who died on the Kerch bridge attack while going on vacation to Crimea. She came from Belgorod region. And so this woman who's a civilian dies, and therefore they're saying, we don't care about her kid suffering, or 14-year-old daughter suffering. And Martyr Maid, who is a podcast host himself, he's into history. He's come on the program before, Daryl. But he said, Ukrainians were talking this way about Russians long before the war. The nationwide pogrom against Russians in 2014 doesn't just come out of nowhere. The hatred had been building since 2004. It's really sad because before that, polls show Ukrainians had a generally positive view of Russians, even in the western part of the country. The 2004 U.S.-sponsored color revolution spawned a universal anti-Russian propaganda campaign that could have been commissioned by Goebbels, really ugly genocidal stuff. Our NGOs participated and encouraged it because it rallied the country to overthrow the president and replace him with an anti-Russian government. The young people in Ukraine today have grown up their whole lives steeped in ubiquitous hate propaganda, and since 2014 have been told by the whole Western world that the eternal Russian is real and deserves their hatred. messages like the ones below are all you see on Ukrainian Telegram channels. These people are broken in ways that can't be fixed, and it's an increasingly likely outcome that they're going to end up as the Palestinians of Europe, always fighting a lost cause, kept in degrading poverty, sustained by resentment and hatred. It's sad. And I don't know, Shane, but I do think it's interesting that it's so transparent how, this whole hate has no home here thing is so brazenly thrown away as soon as it's necessary for some kind of special interest that our establishment is tied to.
Yeah, it's really interesting that these people promote racism in that part of the world, and then they accuse people who aren't racist of being racist here. And that's the ultimate cardinal sin that's the most evil sin that they recognize in their entire system. But they view it as being a vice here, but they view it as being a virtue abroad. You know,
Yeah. Well,
they condemn people here that will fly a Confederate flag or something like that as being the next incarnation of Hitler. And then they praise Ukrainians that are flying swastikas and that have them tattooed on their chests as being heroes of liberal democracy, like that. It's completely absurd.
yeah. Why do you think that hypocrisy is not able to be more detected by the supporters of these next big things, including the Ukrainian conflict? Why is it that they seem to not be able to smell the BS? I mean, the Republican Party base is now starting to smell the BS on the neocon tropes. They're hissing and booing at people like Mike Pence for echoing the same talking points that the base lapped up for decades. So they seem to have the ability to detect hypocrisy to some degree. The base of the Republican Party seems to be able to slightly detect some BS propaganda and hypocrisy from their establishment rhetoric. How come that's not happening more with the Democrat and the neocons on that side?
Well, it's something you talk about a lot, where in a post-Christ world, it's really difficult to deny personhood from anybody for too long, and it's like, at least in America, and you and I grew up in this world. In America, it was really easy after 9/11 because they scapegoated Arabs and Muslims and foreigners and stuff, as all being, as just blanket, just all of them being terrorists, and that there are secret terrorists that look like an average American. Yeah, that's why they had to have the TSA search grandma and stuff. Um, but that's all based upon the denial of personhood of a group of people. Now, I think the thing is that anthropologically that it doesn't stick. You know, they can only do it for so long, because in the aftermath of the Lord coming and resurrecting and bringing dignity to our lives, collectively and individually, they can only deny personhood for so long.
Yeah.
And I think it's easier to deny personhood from people that are, at least from an American perspective, it's easier for the powers that be to deny personhood of people that are on the other side of the ocean versus here, because they can construct a narrative that will last longer, because we're not interacting with Ukrainians. The
Right.
only Ukrainians we interact with is the abstract concept of a Ukrainian,
Yeah.
or the abstract concept of a Russian.
Yeah.
But the dirty little secret is that they're all human beings that are image that bear the image of God, that we all have the same blood flowing through our veins, and we all live, love, and die. I mean, that's
But, but like
we're all humans.
but like Nancy Pelosi and Lindsey Graham and the people that they reflect that run the permanent state in DC, their whole imperial construct for the rules-based order is driven by and dependent on the folks on the ground in Ukraine viewing ethnic Russians as what they call them orcs, not humans, monsters.
Right.
So there is a hidden scapegoat. It's not really hidden because of media. You can see the obviousness of it all. And that's why it won't last, like you said. But their whole utopia of we're all in this together, democracy, it's all dependent on otherizing and violently expelling and hurting and demonizing somebody else. And I think that the Russian conflict has been one they've been working on for some time because they realized, I think, Shane, that if they were going to try to transition the Democratic base from economic populism emphasis over to a gender and racial identity politics and grievances, that racial grievance aspect would not be compatible with their continuance of bloody occupation in the Middle East, because those people tend to be people of color, right? You know what I mean? So it's like they had to realize, wait a second, I'm not saying they did it for this reason, but there's things that have to be done at the same time, which is like, okay, wait a second. If we're going to start goosing up our population with this hypersensitivity to any kind of, dehumanization or otherization of someone who is a person of color, as we're going to term the term now, then that's going to backfire if we keep our priority up in Syria and Iran, and they're seeing images of people of color on Twitter getting pulverized by American democracy bombs. It's just not gonna sell as well. And so they had to shift it to, a country like Russia, which is viewed as white, even though it's not just white, but it's viewed as white by Democrat liberals who don't know anything.
It's actually one of the most multicultural countries in the world.
Yeah,
Russia
but
is.
It doesn't mean anything to an MSNBC, CNN groomed mind, right? They don't know anything but white Putin, right? And white Rasputin that they saw in the Kingsman series and stuff like that. So that's their level of historical engagement typically. And so they're looking at that and they're saying, okay, this is a white villain, and this is a white villain who likes nationalism, and that's an ugly word. And then the other one was that they were anti-LGBTQ. And so they have been working on that for decades, that narrative. And now they've set it in motion, but it's still not that effective because, around half of the country doesn't buy their narrative in Ukraine and the need to, dehumanize Russians to the point where, as that Lindsey Graham thing is going around saying, hey, there's a speech of his where he's telling, if you're a Russian, soldier and you drop a cluster bomb, you're going to go to The Hague. You're going to be tried for war crimes, while they're literally bringing out cluster bombs for Ukrainians to use on Russians. The hypocrisy is absolutely insane. But it seems, Shane, that just pointing out that it's hypocrisy doesn't seem to really move the needle anymore at the degraded level of politics and its discourse today.
I think you're absolutely right.
So then what does? That's the question. What is going to be the thing? Because we've got to be able to marginalize the public support for war and ugliness so bad that even those who would take 17 booster shots would be like, yeah, I just can't do this anymore. And that's the thing that we've got to figure out. There's always an Achilles heel to a paper thin tiger in its propaganda,
Well, in many ways, I think the work has already been done for us, because if you look at this at kind of like the religious system of this vapid secular atheist West, one of our chief dogmas is, I guess really the founding myth of this period in time. It's really steeped in World War II. Like that Oppenheimer movie is about to come out, so a lot of people are going to flock to the theaters to see that, because that is that has a great deal to do with the founding of this incarnation of our civilization and way of life. Well, um, our ethics and morals and sense of who we are and sense of what's right and wrong, it's really steeped in the Holocaust, and also to a shorter degree, it's also steeped in other authoritarian regimes throughout the throughout the 20th century. But it really the hallmark is Nazi Germany. So it's really interesting that the moment you just show a picture of one of these Ukrainian soldiers with a swastika tattooed on their chest, the left will just they'll immediately close their eyes. They'll immediately say, this is taboo, I cannot look at that.
Yep.
I think the important thing is for us to try to, as best we can and forcefully as we can, draw the parallels and say all human life is dignified.
Right.
And it does not your place in time does not matter. And the thing is, the things that were done in the name of unity and democracy um during under Hitler's regime in Nazi Germany, that was wrong. The things that were done by Lenin in the Soviet Union in the name of unity and democracy, that was wrong. The same what was done by Mao in the name of unity and democracy, that was wrong. What's being done in the Ukraine against those that do not tote the one party states party line in the Ukraine, those people just disappear. The Ukrainian secret police go and take them out. And then if you're a Russian speaker in Ukraine, you're going to be treated as a second class citizen there. And what we need to be articulating is just the truth, that because
Pelosi and Mike Pence would have defended the ethnic Russians' otherization. They would have defended them in 2014 and before. He's talking about 2004. It goes back, but it goes back further. But Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence would have defended the ethnic minority in Ukraine if that ethnic minority had been associated with the LGBTQ religion and the stock interest of Raytheon. It's that simple.
Right.
It's not a magic formula, really. I mean, to get them to switch sides on an issue. I mean, they don't really switch, but to pick a side. They're going to pick a side which is most aligned with the financial and religious interests of their mafia networks. You know what I mean? And there's mafia networks in Russia, and there's mafia networks in the West.
Oh yeah.
And they're fighting very much over, the access to the hearts and minds of the Ukrainian territory and the world. And they're fighting over the resources and the dollar and the resources and territorial ambitions of that area. And they have to dress it up into this fantasy. They have to convince people that what they're really seeing is Yoda on the screen in Star Wars rather than, a product that's going to make a return on investors, and people, because we're so entertainment driven, want to believe in the BS. They want to be lied to, and they want to believe that everything's simple, because it's hard to live in a world where things are nuanced. And it seems like a certain percentage of the population never really wants to hold things in nuance, and maybe they can't. Is that true? Or is holding nuance something compatible with the masses? Can 90% of the country hold nuanced positions about, well, this is wrong, but that's also wrong, and therefore we're not going to jump into this,
Yeah.
Seems like they used to be able to. You look back at America's resistance to getting into wars like World War I and so forth. And it seemed like that era, Americans were more nuanced. They're like, okay, well, those things are bad, but we don't need to be involved because we're not going to be able to make it any better. And we're going to get drawn into debt and all kinds of problems we don't need to be involved with. And killing, right?
Well, there was a I don't remember what her name was, but I think she was an Orthodox nun. Um, and she said you can either love the person and hate humanity, or love humanity and hate the person.
Yeah.
You know that you know you can either think of people in the universal sense in a very abstract form and think about the world in those terms, or you can think about people as being persons. And there are major implications, big implications to that. When you're talking about nuance, I think what you really mean is thinking about the world as it is. Dealing with thinking about people as being persons. And what I think a lot of these people do is they call people bigots that love their community, um and and uh and view their ultimate moral responsibility as being to their family and to their community. They view those people as being bigots, and what they do is adhere to this idea that morality and their responsibility, it's to it's to these universal abstractions. And the thing is, the um the universal abstraction is really easy to love, and is really easy to deal with, because it's not a flesh and blood human being person, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and, it just seems like these are, the people who are obsessed with Ukraine, who want to keep the war going, who want for us to keep sending cluster bombs and all this other crap over there. Um, they're people that are not involved in their community. They're people that really don't love other persons around them. They're people that love humans as being a concept. They like the concept of Ukrainians that are fighting off this evil Russian invader. They love that idea, but they don't love people. They don't love the people in their community that are hungry. The ones that they actually see.
Well, some of them even go to churches where they give cookies to the homeless, so they do
Yeah.
do something, you know.
Yeah, but that that's even just a very novel thing to do. Like, that's giving a homeless person a cookie is about, that's about as absurd as giving a mouse a cookie.
Yeah.
But and one other thing too, man. Like, so if you go back to now, Zelensky was elected in, I think it was 2019, wasn't it?
Yeah,
It was
sounds right.
2019, 2018, somewhere in there. Um, if you go and look at what Zelensky's platform was, his platform was to implement the Minsk two accords. To allow the people in the Donbass region to vote. To allow the people in the Donbass region to elect their governors instead of Kiev appointing their governors.
Yeah.
To give them sovereignty, to allow them to vote. That's part of what that was really that was the main core of the Minsk Accords that that Putin withdrew. Those were the terms that the Russians withdrew upon back in 2014. And it had kind of been in limbo. And then when Zelensky ran, the reason that he won with such an overwhelming majority in the runoff election was that he ran on the mainline popular platform, which was to stop shelling the Donbass, and to give those people the right to vote, and keep the country and keep the Ukraine as one unified country, but allowing the Donbass to have sovereignty in the sense that they would be allowed to elect those officials that would be immediately governing them in their localities.
Yeah.
Well, Zelensky lied. He got into office and he didn't do any of those things. What he ended up doing was he doubled down on shelling of the Donbass, and things got worse. So the thing is, um, you know, people in the western part of Ukraine, you know, there's a lot, you know, they've always been pretty anti-Russian because a lot of those people are former Poles and Lithuanians and everything, and that goes back to the 19th century. But the people in the eastern Ukraine are typically ethnic Russians. You know, a lot of them have family members in Russia. So you know, you mentioned the Crimea, the Kerch bridge, the Crimean bridge earlier. You know, that family that was traveling on that bridge, I'm not sure if they were traveling to Crimea or to Russia, but more than likely, those people, like many other people in places like Crimea, you know, their family are spread out across Ukrainian territory and Russian territory. You know, because those boundaries in that part of the world are really kind of absurd.
Right. And it's sad that we have, you know, Tucker Carlson, you know, had that famous exchange with Mike Pence,
Mm-hmm.
and then he did a speech at Turning Point USA, and he made a point that I thought was utterly needed on such a deep level. It's something I've said in different ways over and over again, but he just said it so well at that Turning Point event to a raucous applause, which was by Mike Pence saying, "Oh, you know, I've only heard one side of the story, and that's going to be it, and I'm going to keep arming them to the teeth for endless, endless, endless." He said, "That's not what a Christian does."
Right.
A Christian leader, he's like, "I'm not very experienced as a, you know, geopolitical leader, but I can tell you that as a leader of a family, if you've got two kids that are fighting, you need to be the adult in the room. You got to figure out a way to make peace, not to give one of the kids more and more weapons to beat the other kid harder."
Especially
You know,
cluster bombs, you know,
yeah,
that would be a
yeah.
disaster.
And he said it with such passion. It was just, you could feel it in his spirit. And I was like, wow, that is so healing to hear somebody in left and right discourse say something so true like that, which is, yes, exactly. You know, how can you say that you're a Christian and want to arm to the teeth and not want to make peace?
Right.
And, you know, he's like, you would think that the person's drunk or something. The dad comes home, he gets drunker and starts teaching the kids to beat each other harder, which is a brilliant point, which is like, if you're going to position yourself as a leader in the public sphere, as a Christian, like Mike Pence does, there would be some basic level of peacemaking as the main priority of your heart. And it shows the vapidness of the American conservative Christian project in terms of its political aspirations. You know, how vapid it was,
Yeah.
how deceitful it is and has been for decades. That, you know, just to hear that contrast between, oh, we'll just keep on sending the weapons, and trying to use that preachy tone to cover up for that which Mike Pence or Tucker revealed it to be, which is a drunken father getting drunk and giving more weapons for the kids to beat each other to death with.
Yeah.
How brilliant of an illustration is that? Because Mike Pence and these folks want to represent themselves as, we're the world's policemen and we're a shining beacon on a hill, where a shining beacon on the hill doesn't arm cluster bombs for a conflict between brothers that could easily be resolved with sobriety.
Yeah.
And when Barack Obama's pastor said, "God damns America for that," America is experiencing the curses of what happens when it continues to double down on such ridiculous violence and evil. But at the same time, you have to say the American people generally don't want these wars to continue. I mean, they get suckered into a lot of lies, but even through all the lies, they generally stay 50-50 in terms of their dissent on war, at least, if not higher, with recent conflicts like Syria and Libya, where it was like 65%, 70% against those conflicts. So, and then you see, you know, like you said, in Ukraine, despite what we just described as some lingering ethnic rivalries between West and East, they still had enough sense to vote for a candidate who promised to build unity and respect for the eastern part of Ukraine.
Right.
And they voted for something, they got the opposite. Just like Americans voted for Bush for peace, they got the opposite, wars. They
Yep.
voted for Barack Obama for peace, they got the opposite, more wars. They voted for Trump for peace, they didn't get quite the peace, but it was something closer to it, which is why he's got a million criminal investigations right now. So
Yeah.
that shows you where the peace candidates head. They head to jail if they really even try to live up to their promises, apparently, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
probably where, let's be real. Let's be real quick here. That's exactly where Zelensky would be right now. He would be in a prison cell if he carried through on his promises of peace. He'd be in a
Yeah.
prison cell or dead.
Yeah.
Instead of being on Time Magazine and in Vatican handshakes after they watched Circus Soleil with Pope Francis, they would, instead of having all that, he would be in prison right now or dead or exiled.
Yeah.
So that's the results of being for peace in the world of politics, which is the domain of Satan.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're at human beings, we're fundamentally tribal, so we concern ourselves most with the things that are closest to us, and then the further away you get, the less and less and less we concern ourselves with the things that are furthest away from us. It's a scale. And I think one of the reasons that your average American has been totally snowed on this, on the Ukraine thing, I don't see the Ukraine flags and stuff nearly as much now as I did a year ago. But first of all, the media coverage of Ukraine, this is unprecedented. I don't even remember the Iraq War being this heavily covered. And it's interesting too, during the Iraq War, and even during like the bombings of Kosovo and Serbia and stuff in the 90s, US media, they had correspondents on the ground. Our media, they don't have correspondents on the ground where the action is.
Yeah.
The only place where they have correspondents on the ground, it's in Kiev, which that place is like it's like South Beach in Miami, 24 hours a day. It's like a party there all the time. You
Yeah.
know, but I guess I said all that to say that your average American, I don't think that I think they have so many other things on their plate that they don't have the time to go in and study the history of the Donbass and study the history of the Ukraine going all the way back to like I guess going back like 1,000 years or something, and trying to steep themselves in the history. They have too many other things on their plate, like things that are at the forefront of their minds, like working so that they can pay their bills, and making sure that their kids have a good education, and all that other kind of stuff. So
Well,
so
that's how they actually pay the bills in some sense, is putting up the Ukraine flag.
right.
Right? Because by signaling that they are in agreement with the dominant power group's narratives, they're signaling that they want high status, which means they want job positions, they want high status in the neighborhood, in the community, that will give them opportunities to access to higher networks, more social proof and approval, right? So they're in some ways, putting up the Ukrainian flag is exactly an extension of their need to preserve their own interests first, rather than the interests of the other. But what makes the propaganda so effective, right, is that the establishment has figured out how to subconsciously hit the nerve of the Christian haunted culture that is always concerned with the other. Jesus says, leave the 99 and go after the one, right? And so there's a way in which they create these narratives where it's like, they feel like they're doing that. I'm leaving the 99, so to speak, of my own interests to put up the flag for Ukraine, these poor people far away who are being slaughtered like Ewoks against the Empire. So they feel like they're going after the one. They're going after the little martyr, the little underdog. But in reality, they're actually signaling that they're part of the overdog, that they're part of the establishment, right, American empire and all of its latest fashionable outrages. And they're signaling the right rhetoric, which means they're a good company man or company woman, which means they should be primed to be a part of the in crowd in their society and move up in the hierarchy of life. So it's like they get to have their cake and eat it too, which is why the establishment's propaganda machine is so effective, is that everything they do is about giving people in-group power, but doing it in a way that they get to feel like they're doing it for the least of these, for the underdog, for the misfit. You know, because if you ask any Ukrainian flag supporter who doesn't know anything about the conflict, they'll just say, I'm defending, because at the end of the day, I do agree it's a complicated thing. I do agree that we should be against all wars.
Yeah.
But it's a very nuanced position and a wise position to say, I can be against someone invading a country, but also be smart enough to know that the other side has been just as much, if not more so, involved with making this happen. And people don't want that kind of answer. They want a black or a white answer that makes it easy for them to, get on board with. And they don't want to believe anything that shatters that, because that's a very dangerous place, because then they have to actually critically think on their feet without a herd doing it for them. And we all want to believe that we've critically analyzed it. That's why the Bible says all we like sheep have gone astray. Yeah. Right? Each person you ask, if you ask anybody who believes in the Ukraine propaganda, you say, did you get that from TV? They'll say, of course not. They never will say, yes, I got it all from TV.
Yeah, this is a conclusion that I came to myself.
Yeah, all we like sheep have gone astray, each into our own way. A sheep, if you don't know you're a sheep, then you think as a sheep that you're moving your leg in the direction you're moving it. In reality, the herd is moving it and you don't know it. The herd is moving your movements and you don't know it, right? And that's why the Bible wants us to start with the premise that we are sheep. And once you understand that, you realize, well, much of the things that I desire and believe, I probably didn't come to in an island. I probably came to because of the other impulses and desires I see around me and the narratives that I read and the things that I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of high status or this or that. Most humans don't have really the humility to even begin to accept that fully. Even in the things that they've picked that could be correct, Like if I say, well, why did you pick the church that you're belonging to? You'll say, well, it's because I've studied it objectively and I decided that this is the official solution for religion. And you're like, but that's not really. It's the upbringing you have. It's the narratives that you've been given as a child. It's the social economic status that you're in. It's the historical context that you're in. All of those things contribute to the process of where you've landed. That doesn't mean that it's wrong that you've landed there. It just means that it takes a lot of epistemological humility to even say these things, right? We always want to just hide it in the romantic delusion that we just objectively analyze facts in a vacuum and determined independently and sovereignly that this is the official church or this is the true philosophy or whatever. But it's not true. We're motivated by narratives.
Yeah. Oh, listen, 100%. What you said made me kind of think about how narratives are really when you cut a system of thought off from the human person, you end up with an ideology, you end up with propaganda, you end up with non-truth, and it's really interesting to me to see the rightful condemnation of the ethnocentrism of the ethno-supremacist state of Nazi Germany, by these people, which I fully agree with, but then when it comes to a place like Israel, for instance, which is a modern day example of an ethno-supremacist state, A lot of them give it a cutout. They say, that's not only okay, but it's admirable. To treat Palestinians as to treat Palestinians like their dogs. And that's perfectly fine. And that's what's been happening in the Ukraine for a very, very long time. Well, at the very least since 2004. Russian speakers in the Ukraine have been treated like dogs. Their homes have been burned, the places where they live have been shelled, the schools that their kids go to have gotten blown up. It's been really, really bad there, and it's because this Ukrainian government that we have funded, and George Soros and a lot of those kind of people, it's an ethno supremacist state. China is an ethno supremacist state. In particular, China is a Han supremacist state. But nobody ever criticizes China for that. It's just really interesting that people here in America that are not ethno supremacists get accused of that over and over and over again. But then these people admire and say that ethno supremacy is actually good overseas. It's like their brains are broken.
But they're ethnocentrists themselves in making that claim,
Right. Well, it's just like they'll say if you're against euthanasia or if you're against abortions that you're ethno supremacist. You're like, what? But I think what it comes down to is
they literally say that the statement, I think the FBI or somebody, one of those groups, they're all the same, has now officially said that if you say it's okay to be white, that's a hate speech.
Right.
So you imagine being in China. Will China ever have a moment where they say it's okay to be Han? Is hate speech? Will that ever happen in China? I don't think so. Maybe
no. Actually, I think the opposite. I think the opposite will always be the case. If somebody in China says it is not okay to be Han, that's hate speech in China.
Right. So, like you said, in Israel, if you say, it's okay to be Israeli, is that considered hate speech in Israel? I don't think so. Is it?
No, that's just confessing the standard.
Well, it's Christianity that says leave the 99 and go after the one.
Right.
So obviously, the psychopaths that are oligarchic in their nature, the multinational corporations, the government bureaucracies in America, have figured out a way, intuitively or whatever, to hijack our Christian sensibility, which puts the other in a state of love, agape, self-giving love to the other, has figured out how to hijack that sensibility that the cross has put into our hearts and twist it in a way that makes it so that you can't even say anything positive about yourself without being brandished a hateful person. Meanwhile, other nations who don't have that same Christian standard are allowed to keep, doing egregious racialist policies. And, Americans, meanwhile, are not allowed to say anything. They're not allowed to say their founders were nice. That's evil. We're not allowed to say that we are comfortable in our own skin. That's evil.
Yeah.
That's obviously psychopaths have figured out how to hijack Christian sensibility and use it as a bludgeon here. That's obviously what's going on. I mean, there's no other narrative that explains that peculiar situation we find ourselves in the West.
It seems like, the incarnation, the incarnation of Christ has a lot of consequences to it. It reverberates through history, but probably the biggest consequence, or one of the biggest consequences, would probably be the impact it has on moral reasoning. What it does, it crystallizes the importance of personhood. So I can't really think of of any examples of the Lord in the Gospels having a whole lot of positive things to say about people in an abstract sense. He deals relationally with individual people. You know,
Yeah.
and that sets the tone for how we are supposed to interact with each other and also reason about one another. That just backing up to ethno supremacy, to ethno nationalism. We oppose it not because it's a competing narrative or because we don't like it because it's mean. We don't like it or we're opposed to it because it dehumanizes the human person. The human person has dignity, and anything that takes that dignity away from that person, anything that strips that person of humanity and their importance, we must repudiate. And whether it's ethno supremacy, ethno nationalism, or if it's the disgusting banking system that we have that operates by inflating the currency and depriving the poor of their basic needs. um you know our opposition to those things should be grounded, our repudiation of those things should be grounded in our affirmation of the dignity of the human person, the dignity of human life. Not opposing those things as the left do, or even as the right do, as people that are not thinking incarnationally. Not opposing those things because, oh, that's a competing ideology or that's a competing narrative. No, 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 no. The reason that we um repudiate those things is because they're they're depriving human beings of their dignity,
Right.
and they get their dignity from the Lord Jesus Christ.
And they get their dignity whether they're Christian or not. That's important.
Right. Yes. It's totally universal.
And the right has a problem. That's why they're doubling down on ethno ideas and nationalism as the end all be all is really, a fool's errand, right? Because the future is universal. Okay.
Yeah.
Because the church is universal and God owns the planet Earth. And we're going to continually see a universal movement of the gospel, even if it gets local in some ways. The scope is not tied to one nation or one church, really, in the sense
Right.
of one division. And I think that is an affront to the conservative self-righteousness, because a conservative wants to deify the family and deify boundaries for in and of themselves rather than use them as proper tools under the submission of the universal vision of Christ. Right. And that's a hard tension for people to hold. And I think that's what's playing out right now, because it's the left is losing its mind, and it would not be as nuts if the right didn't mimetically lose their mind proportionally in response. Because when the left looks and says, oh, wait, so we've got these little white ethno-political figures emerging on the new right, that confirms why we need to double down on going nuts in the direction that we're going. And when they hear the new little Zoomer conservatives say we need to ban them and drop them out of helicopters, then they hear that, and that affirms that they have every reason to double down on being violent towards them first. So it's a classic mimetic scandal where you're in a stumbling block position, where everything confirms your worst paranoias and you double down on being uglier and meaner faster than the other, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what makes shows like mine so difficult to pigeonhole and understand, is because I'm truly trying not to do that. And every podcast you listen to is typically going to have some gimmick, like we're the ortho bros, or we're the Catholic trads, or we're the libertarian edgelords, or we're the neocons, or we're the Caesar boys. We want little Caesars to come and save us. They always got a gimmick, but it's really hard to just try to work within the Christian vision itself without the asterisk, you know, without the asterisk. And that's so hard to do for folks because people want to say, I want my Christian plus my Caesar. I want my Christian plus my church politics. I hear that these little, not to pick on Catholics here, but you know, I've heard this a lot because there's this new fad of trad Catholics, and they keep saying we need to have America has always been an anti-Catholic project, and it's time to have a Catholic vision, rule this nation. And I'm like, okay, you go ahead and keep asking for GameCube to get back into the stores. I mean, that's what you're saying. You're saying something that is a fantasy.
Yeah.
This is not, America is not going to be ruled by Catholic monarchic politics.
Right.
So if your vision of how God works only operates in a fantasy, then you're not worshiping God. You're following your own little mental model, and you're, you know, idolizing your own little construct, your little, like you said, your idea of God.
Right.
You know, you have to be able to deal with the imminent incarnational reality you're in, and not just wave your fingers and say, I found out. The truth is we need a monarch. We need to have Franco come back. I mean, what are you talking about? This is just stupid childishness. This shouldn't even be considered in discourse. It's so stupid. You know, we got people dying. We got people sick. You and I know this. Yeah. And these people want to play around games. Like, let's just wait for our little king and our little political position to be imposed by force magically. And then we'll kill all the communists. What does that mean?
Well, and you know, David, you know, the thing is, you know, and that's the interesting thing. I mean, you know, if you think back 10 years ago, I don't think you had really anybody advocating for monarchy, you know, with the exception of like fringe people. Now there are a lot of people in a lot of trad circles and stuff there that are advocating for monarchy or something like it. But you know, this is the thing that I always find interesting about them is they have this idea that France was this big monolithic monarchy, and really in the perversion of French history that came down after the French Revolution, because remember, the victors always write the history, and the victors were not the monarchists. Coming out of the French Revolution, they portray the French monarchy as being this absolute dictatorship, you know, akin to something like like the Kim dynasty in North Korea. But that's actually not the way it was at all. And the you know, if you really want to talk about being traditional, and being a trad Christian, you know, not just Catholic, not just Orthodox, but just being a trad Christian, and looking at the types of governments that trad Christians typically lived under, they were typically monarchies, but governance was primarily administered at the localist of levels, at the most local of levels. That's the principle of subsidiarity that Thomas Aquinas talks about. But the thing is, the idea that someone like a czar in St. Petersburg or the French king, the idea that they were that they were coming up with the rules that were going to govern the day-to-day life of somebody living in the far-flung corner of their country, that's totally absurd. You know, these people, they did not have electricity. They didn't have any of that stuff. Their governance, it was primarily administered through the localist of levels, you know, and there were only a handful of things that the king or the czar took care of, you know, that they were in charge of. And even in those cases, I think the czar was a little bit more powerful than like the French king was, for instance. But there were always limits to their power. You know, the whole the theology of the divine right of kings, that actually doesn't come about until after the Protestant Reformation, to come up with a new system in protest of the previous system.
Yeah.
You know, and so the thing is, what I guess what I'm saying is the connection here is that the predominant Christian view of governance, it has always been that things must be governed and administered at the localist level possible. That if a policy decision can be made at the local level, that can also be made at the regional level or at the national level, it must be made at the local level.
And that's compatible with,
that's the Christian notion.
That's close and compatible to the Jesus statement that my power is made perfect in weakness.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is,
because a local neighborhood decision about a matter is comparatively weak to an empire making the decision from a worldly perspective. But from Christ's perspective, that's probably more likely to be the condition by which his power can be made manifest. Right?
Well,
taking responsibility for their actions rather than relying on top-down edicts to behave themselves.
Yeah.
That's what Paul said. Paul talks about the law, and what it does when it becomes something that tears you apart from the grace and love of God, rather than something that should be used as a schoolmaster to teach you to become an adult.
Well, and don't you think it's interesting that it seems like empires and nations and very, very, very centralized systems, they make decisions based upon abstractions, But when you're talking about governance at the local level, and you can even zoom into the localist level, which is the family unit. Decisions are made staring at one another, flesh and blood. You're looking into one another's eyes and saying, this is what I believe we need to do.
Yeah.
And this is why. And if somebody has a different idea, they'll be able to say it, but like if it's your kid or something, that says I want an ice cream cone and it's 9 p.m., you'll say to them, son, it's not going to happen. It's too late for you to eat an ice cream cone. It's not good for you, whatever. But the thing is, the way that a situation like that would be handled at the national or regional level is no ice cream cones after 6 p.m., or no ice cream cones on weeknights or something. And there's no exceptions. And if you violate that rule, you get put in jail. No.
Yeah, our man-child reigning ideology, though, would more likely say, if you don't allow ice cream after 9 p.m., you're an abuser and your children will be taken from you.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the man-child ideology that runs our country now, right?
Yeah.
The hatred of boundaries and discipline and order is the new order, right? But it's interesting that when you look at the way in which these narratives are unfolding, it's pretty clear, though, that we've got to understand how the scapegoat mechanism being dissolved is bringing us to this point. That you can't go back in history and impose a monarchy for a time in which the scapegoat mechanism and the sacred have been that much more dissolved. And that's important to understand that history is going somewhere. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we give such an emphasis on the anthropological revelation of the Bible. Because if you don't have it, you're stuck with abstractions. If all you read the Bible is, what does this tell me about God? But you don't even know what mankind is about, then you really have no tangible understanding about how to practice being like God. If you don't know who you are, you only have a metaphysical, disembodied view of God, because you only have a theological reading of the Bible, then you don't know what you're actually supposed to mature into. You don't know what your boundaries of growth should look like and how they should unfold, And that's why I think it's important for folks to realize that, these things are not happening in a vacuum. They're not a fluke. These things are happening because this is exactly what Jesus said. Jesus said, I've come to bring a sword. And when you see a father or mother divided from their sons and daughters, like Jesus predicts, well, what were they united about before?
Yeah.
They were united in their hatred of the hidden Russian. They were united in their hatred of the hidden leper. They were united in their hatred of the hidden other. You see?
Yeah.
And once you dissolve that binding agent of the believable scapegoat that everybody unanimously believes is deserving of the pain and suffering and expulsion, now you create division. And that's why Thanksgiving is divided now over Ukraine or the COVID shot or any of these other things where there's a scapegoat involved. Because people don't believe unanimously in the guilt of the victims that the establishment wants them to glom onto. And society can't unite in that way anymore. And so, when you don't have an anthropological foundation of the Bible, then all you're going to do is just stupidly grasp for moments in history that you want to romantically reimpose on the world because you believe that history is like a static entity, like it's a static entity that you could just rearrange a few characters and power dynamics and it'll just fit right now. It's not how it works. History is a test, and when we're moving in a direction, Jesus said we would. And we can either do it the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is to, like you said, to dissolve power, to repent, and to repent of the delusion of ourself itself, which is the hardest thing to do. Right? It's harder than letting go of our collectivism, is letting go of ourself. But that's something that we're required to do in order to get to heaven. Right? The moment you meet God, I heard it say, someone said this recently. I don't know if it said that. The moment you begin to see God is the moment you let go of yourself. The moment you end your, is that you dissolve, you let go of your right to yourself and you dissolve your claim on your selfhood is the moment you can start to become like God, to start to meet God. Right?
That's very true.
And we don't want to do that. We want to have Jesus plus our defense mechanisms. Agape love does not, here's the problem with Christians in politics. You can't really create a political formula out of agape love. Agape love is so radical and so beautiful, so disregarding of one's right to oneself. And it has no boundaries. The prodigal son is about the prodigal God who loves so prodigiously, that he would give everything and run to his disobedient, arrogant son. The father's not supposed to run to a son in that culture. The son is to run to the elder. He runs down the way to meet his son. How do you create a political system in that image? That's impossible.
Well, don't you think that agape love, without being grounded in the human person, it just becomes an abstract altruism,
Well, yeah,
that
not agape love.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I think the notion that a lot of people have of agape love is that it's merely just self-sacrifice, just not thinking of yourself much. But it is that, but it also has to be paired up with loving others, with willing the good of other people.
Right. Yeah, if you're
Yeah.
taking a shot and you're saying I'm doing this for the health of my loved ones, but I want those who don't take the shot to die miserable deaths, that's not agape love.
Right. There's no love there.
And it's the same the other way. If you're taking ivermectin and you want people with COVID shots to have miserable, painful deaths, then you're not doing agape love.
Right.
Right. And the same thing goes for all of it. If you're a fan of Putin and you want Ukrainians to get pulverized because you're a fan of Putin's PR, you're not agape love. You're disobeying Christ, And the same goes for the other way. If you're on board with the Ukrainians and you want to see Russians killed like Lindsey Graham does, that's not agape love either. Agape love messes the whole thing up.
Yeah.
And it is personal because it's a one-to-one relationship. It's in relationship. You can't do it in abstract. You can't create an institutional policy of agape love. It is a moment that seizes the human person in relationship to the other. You know, it's not something you can put on autopilot with AI.
Right.
And because agape love doesn't have, there's no number to it. There is no real standard in the Bible that stops you from being like Tolstoy, where you give up all of your possessions. There's no commandment by Jesus that says, don't do that all the way because I need you to be a little bit prudent here.
Right.
There's none of that. There's no circuit breaker there that stops that. You know?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing.
It's only by God's grace that we don't go all the way and we're still loved by God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and really the only person that's capable of showing agape love to all of humanity collectively is the Lord, you know?
Yeah. But he said that we would do greater things than him. So what would that look like if we actually took agape love seriously?
Well, it would probably have to do with us, rather than gazing up toward our concept of nation, or even our concept of state as being our kind of like protector and means of means of providing a safety net and everything for the least of these in society. What it would be is for us to provide the safety net and advocate for one another at a local level, facing one another, going, going to the farmer's market, going, going to church and meeting people and talking to people and striking up relationships with other people that live in your community, and kind of starting there. Yeah, showing love and concern for one another and a genuine interest, and really being interested a little bit less in national politics, because really in many ways the national politics, a lot of it is it's entertainment. It is modern day wrestling,
Yeah. We have a fertile ground for doing this right now because our whole nation has been arsenic poisoned by seed oils and all these things like this.
Yeah.
So there's so many people in your neighborhood right now that you could help them stop slowly poisoning themselves with arsenic that they don't know about in their food supply. If you can't get your neighbor to stop poisoning themselves, if you're convinced, and maybe you're not convinced, you need to do more scientific research on the matter, but if you're convinced that seed oil poisoning is the same as arsenic poisoning on the level of how it poisons, then you can start your agape love by loving on those around you to help them not put arsenic in their food anymore.
Yeah.
And if you start there, that's a good start.
Because that's a very good start.
That arsenic poisoning leads to catastrophic health issues, medical bills, and mental health issues, Alzheimer's, a whole host of inflammatory responses that are unique to the standard American diet that has been poisoning the world over. So start there. That's a good place to start. Where would if the early church had access to information that Rome was poisoning its citizens on accident or whatever by getting all of its citizens to sprinkle arsenic on their food every day, what would the early church do? Try to get them fed with food without the arsenic poisoning.
Right.
That's a basic way to start. Your relationship with people is try to help with healing, because that's what Jesus did. Jesus started by healing people as an opportunity to reveal to them the things of the heart. Because ultimately it is a matter of trust. If you trust that the king knows what's best for you, you'll never really change your, inputs about drugs and food. But if you don't trust in kings and princes, but you trust in the way of agape love, then that means you'll be willing to evaluate what's actually real and what's actually good for you. So
Yeah.
that's a great way to practice agape love in a way that radically upsets the world's expectations. Shane, I really appreciate your time today. And any last thoughts here?
Well, I guess the my final thought is circling back to Ukraine. If you think about some of the things that we were just recently talking about, the war over there, it's really about who should govern the Donbass. Should the people that live in the Donbass govern themselves, or should Kiev uh um govern the Donbass? And what NATO and the Western Alliance have said is that Kiev should govern the Donbass, not the people that live there. But it's really interesting when you look over at Serbia. I almost said Syria, which that's a whole other bag of worms. But when you look over at Serbia, we have a completely opposite policy regarding Kosovo. You know, we have told the Serbs that Kosovo is to be an independent country, and Serbia must recognize that, um, in spite of them not wanting to recognize that. And we've done the same thing to Serbia regarding like Montenegro and Bosnia and all that, that whole mess. But we're on the side of local autonomy when it comes to to the Serbs and the people that live in the former Yugoslavia. But then we have a completely opposite policy when it comes to Ukraine. And it just goes to show,
And the
um
same with Syria, right? Same with
yeah, oh,
Syria,
oh,
because Syria,
yeah, totally. Yeah, the Syrians didn't invite us in, but we're in Syria right now. We have boots on the ground, and and we're keeping we're basically holding a lot of the Syrian oil fields hostage from
and we're
from the
and we're
Syrians.
we're encouraging separatist movements to disobey their central government, right?
Right. So the thing is, we we're in favor of local governance in certain cases when it's something that's screwing Russia. Yeah, and then we're in favor of a more national policy when it's screwing Russia. I don't really know any other way to put it, because it just seems to me the reason that we have the policies that we do in Syria and in Serbia of wanting extreme local rule there and wanting to fragment and balkanize those countries is because those countries are historic allies of Russia, you know. And then we co-opted Ukraine in the revolutions that we fomented there, 2004 and 2014. And what our goal was, what was to really nationalize that country and to deprive the people of the East, which are ethnic Russians, Russian speakers, and very sympathetic to all things Russian, very culturally Russian, and historically and religiously Russian, and everything, as opposed to the people in the West, and in the as opposed to the people in Western Ukraine. We have the complete opposite policy there. We want Ukraine to be this one nationalist country that's really tyrannically ruled from Kiev.
Yeah, and that's
You
just a
know,
foreign policy of chaos. That's a foreign policy of chaos, and we shouldn't be okay with our names being used to co-sign on this chaos around the world.
it just seems to me that the only way any of this makes any sense, and I have asked people who are a lot smarter than I am, who know a lot more about this stuff than I do, to please put together some coherent strategy where all this makes sense, where it's not just based upon the United States having an anti-Russian foreign policy. And nobody can articulate anything that makes any sense. The the goal here, in my opinion, is that we're trying to break Russia's neck so that we can try to fragment Russia into a whole bunch of smaller countries. so that we can balkanize it and then seize their resources.
Why didn't we finish the job when we had Russia weak in the 90s? If they were so desperate to do that to them.
Well, I think what we figured was that we would be by flooding the country with cash and debt, and with a whole bunch of advisors from Harvard and from Wall Street, and that whole revolving door up there in the city of London, and everything, that we would be able to acquire control of Russia's resources without having to balkanize the country. You know,
Yeah.
that if we reorganized the country, if we ransacked it and put in charge a little minority of oligarchs,
Yeah.
then we could control the oligarchs, you know. But that's not the way it worked out, because Putin came to power in the year 2000. You know, love him or hate him, Putin was not passive like Boris Yeltsin was. You know, so I think
Yeah.
that made us have to that put the onus on us to rethink our strategy, and our strategy. I believe our strategy now is to try to break the Russian Federation up into maybe about 30 or 40 separate countries, and then
Yeah.
play them off one another.
And then is our strategy to just become a vassal state of China in the process, or that's not part of their strategy?
Well, I have no idea what I you know, the whole China thing doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Yeah.
But you know, it really seems like, I don't know. It seems like since about 2000, you know, it seems like about since, I don't know, maybe 2012 or so, that Russia has been that Russia has been in the sights of America's foreign policy guns, you know, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
We've been going around the world and trying to create chaos, and to try to weaken all things Russian.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think the fundamental problem is that the Russians control so many resources. You know, they have such a massive commodities industry, and Russia in itself is such a big military power, that in many ways I think we're underestimating them, and we have underestimated Russia. You
Yeah.
know, there's no doubt that the U.S. military budget is the biggest in the world, but we have the most expensive military in the world. But just because something's expensive doesn't mean qualitatively it's the best. I think America's definitely outguns anybody else, but I think that the U.S. government spending $1 billion on munitions. I think that $1 billion. I think the Chinese or the Russians spending $1 billion on munitions, I think it gets them bigger and better munitions for the $1 billion than $1 billion gets the Pentagon.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you know what's amazing about the Pentagon is with this UFO thing, you're seeing how deceptive the Pentagon is. Tim Burkett, or Tom Burkett, who is a Republican out of Tennessee, him and Anna Paulina are going to do a hearing on UFOs on the 26th of this month. And Burkett or whatever is already saying, oh yeah, you can't trust the Pentagon. They'll lie about this and lie about that. They came down, he said they brought me and Matt Gaetz and Representative Luna to a private briefing to be revealed some of the UFO stuff, and they weren't bringing it out. And then they kept begging them to bring it out or something. And they brought them something. And it's like weird stuff like that, they keep going wishy-washy, and everybody doesn't know what to believe. And it's just like, there's lies upon lies upon lies in our government. There's factions upon factions upon factions upon factions. There's rival groups having information that they don't want to reveal to this group. There's these black money, operations going on that none of the intelligence groups even know anything about or something. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
chaos upon chaos upon chaos. But what motivates all these little factions is, like, like you said, having external enemies, you know, having somebody to, unite against. Those things seem to keep the machine going in somewhat the same direction. But
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see, I think in the future, we're going to have to do another show on the matter of these UFOs and UAPs and what does this mean from a narrative standpoint, from a religious standpoint, from an existential standpoint, because I do think that regardless of what's behind the matter, it will become a much more important topic. They're slow
Yeah.
walking. They're slow walking it, drips and drips and drips.
You know, yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like all this. If you go back and look at the media narrative framing Russia in the way that it did over a long period of time, if you go back 10 or 15 years and you see the very beginnings of the whole narrative that, oh, maybe we can't really trust the Russians anymore. Oh, the Russians are not all that trustworthy. The Russians are liars. The Russians are evil. The Russians are Nazis. It's been this long progression. You can go back and you can see this long progression regarding UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
Of them just dropping little crumbs here and there, saying, well, this Pentagon pilot came out and said that he witnessed seven UFOs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and this apparent pilot, or not Pentagon pilot, but like a Navy pilot, apparently this pilot was allowed to go out and talk about something that he had been told not to talk about. And obviously they weren't disciplined. So if this guy wasn't disciplined, that means that the military was okay with him going out and saying it. And
Or
if
at
the
least one
military was
fact.
okay with him going out and saying it, then the question there is, what narrative is the military, or what narrative are the people in power trying to frame? And
Yeah.
they've been framing this thing for a while.
Yeah. They've been doing a very slow walk with this one.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what's behind all this and, analyzing it. I mean, it's easy to say there's nothing there, but be more interesting if there is something there, obviously. But again, we're just at a point where, I think we're coming to the end of the post World War II era of the world. And it's no coincidence that this war, which is at the tail end of this era, Ukraine war, is a battle of whose grandparents are the Nazis.
Right.
Russia says we are the ones who beat Nazi Germany, and we're going to beat their grandchildren, who many of them revere Bandera and other figures who are allied with the Nazis.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a nice heir to the throne. But then you listen to the West in terms of the who's fighting the Nazis throne, right? Who's on the throne in opposition to the Nazis? Then you listen to the West, and the West says, no, the Russians, they were behind the Holodomor starvation campaign, and they were behind this and that. They're the ones who do ethnic cleansing. They're Putin is the new Hitler. So they're the heirs to the Nazi throne. So we're the heirs to the anti-Nazi throne. Mm-hmm. And everything in our, it's interesting. And I want to do a deeper dive on this article by Matthew Crawford, was the sexual revolution of government psychological operation. And he traces the World War II era psychologists, the psychoanalysts that came over from Eastern Europe. And they came in with a project which was anti-fascism. They wanted to remake America to destroy the father figure and everything else, because they were afraid that the Christian middle-class values that animated much of America after World War II would end up manifesting into a fascist Nazi mentality, right? And so they did everything they could to psychologically operate on the American people to destroy the family foundation, to destroy and disrespect the father figure as something to revere and respect, and to supplant it with this undifferentiated chaos of eternal revolution. Well, that's become the new therapeutic rule of our society, and it has supplanted the church. and the church's standard of agape love and structure and order for this eternal revolution. So all of that is coming out of World War II. So our wars, our monetary policy, our sense of self and psychology, all of this comes out of this World War II cataclysm. And it's all coming to a head in our lifetime. So buckle up, folks. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yes.
But, all right, Shane, thanks for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, David, thank you.
Yeah, and email us hello@aneighborschoice.com. That's hello@aneighborschoice.com with any feedback and thoughts, questions, and guest suggestions. We'll be back with more content soon. Thank you.